DRFI Expo Investment. I'm Bilal Anwar. I'm the CEO of National Disaster Risk Management Fund. With me today is
Raja Rehan Arshad. I'm really honored to be here. I retired last year from the World Bank as the lead disaster risk management specialist and have had the fortune to work in the disaster risk management and conflict crisis management for the last almost 40 years. And it's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. I'm here with Bashir Hussain. I'm working with the DRMF as disaster management and disaster risk financing expert. And I have experience of disaster management for the last 14 to 15 years. And thank you. Thank you very much. So we gathered here today for a very important topic. That's disaster risk financing and insurance for resilient Pakistan. Why we are talking about this, why NDRMF is talking about this, because NDRMF have a mandate to develop the first ever national disaster risk financing strategy. And we are very vigorously working on this strategy, and the strategy is at the advanced stages of its development. And very soon we are going to be rolling the strategy out and we'll be sharing with our stakeholders and seeking their inputs and comments. So what this strategy is going to address, disaster risk financing is very important. I would say that the critical component of disaster risk reduction. It basically touches upon or it addresses the financial side of resilience building. Those of you who know about NDRMF, we have the mandate for Resilient Building Pakistan or Resilient Pakistan. And we've been working for a number of disaster risk reduction, climate action, climate adaptation, a number of those initiatives. While we've been working very vigorously and actively in reducing the physical risk, we do this by building the flood protection, early warning systems, climate smart agriculture practices, a number of other initiatives like this. We believe that given the challenges which Pakistan is facing, and it's going to face what the studies and the data is basically showing us, there is a need for the financial resilience as well, because what is happening right now is whenever disaster hit, first of all, we have a very reactive approach to disasters. So whenever a disaster arises, a flood or it's a seismic or any other kind of disaster, so all the agencies actually they do get mobilized, and we all get actually busy into the relief, recovery, rehabilitation, reconstruction, and those areas, which is very, very important. It's critically important. That's how it should be done once the disaster is there. But that should not really undermine. That should not really let us lose our focus on the resilience building. And resilience building is for reducing the risk for disasters. So while we have to carry on working on and we have to scale up our efforts and our activities and investments into the physical risk reduction by watershed management, by flood protection measures, for a number of other initiatives, is equally important that we actually develop something which allow the government of Pakistan to increase its resilience or to reduce the risk for financial risks. So this is the purpose, this is the goal of disaster risk financing strategy which NDRMF is developing. It has many aspects of it. It's a complex strategy. It's the first time it's going to be implemented in Pakistan and in a number of other countries as well. So it is taking its time, but we are actually developing the strategy in an extremely consultative manner by involving all the stakeholders, both national level as well as seeking support from international experts. So one of the reasons Raja Rehan Arshad is with us and working for the last few months with us is that he is actually bringing that international regional expertise into the NDRMF world, particularly disaster risk financing strategy. So, Rise of, if I just initiate this, so you know the strategy which NDRMF is developing, and I think there is absolutely no need for me to undermine or emphasize the importance for this kind of a strategy in Pakistan. Given the scale and the gravity and the pace of disaster which we are likely to face, do you think how do you actually relate this in the overall disaster risk reduction strategy for Pakistan?
Thank you, Bilal. First of all, for the excellent introduction. Once again, it's a real privilege to be here. I have had the good fortune of being one of the thinkers on disaster risk financing and insurance almost 15 years back when this was being debated in the World Bank. And since then, it's gone through a lot of evolution. But just going back to the main question that Bilal asked, I think let me just step back over here a little bit and talk about resilience and disaster risk management, and within that, disaster risk reduction in particular. The reason why I would like to do this is because there is this misperception that disaster risk financing and insurance is generally about availability of funds when a disaster strikes, and how immediate availability of funds can be assured so that during the search and rescue emergency phase, as well as relief and humanitarian phase, there is no shortage of funding, because that is the time when people need assistance, especially from the state, on an urgent basis. That is true, that is one part of it. But disaster risk financing, part of DRF and I, by these three words, is talking about financing the risk. And the insurance part in some ways describes what kind of risk transfer can happen when a hazard plays out and there is a certain level of disaster which includes some kind of adverse effect and impact. In this context, it's important for any country in the world. Some are at a very advanced stage, some are not as advanced and they're still catching up. It's important for every country, and especially the state within those countries, to lead from the front and invest in mainstreaming disaster risk reduction. In all development and non-development activities, including the budgeting aspects, there is a need to make sure that there are adequate funds for disaster risk reduction. This is the ex-ante side of making sure that if a hazard does play out, and it's not the disaster that happens, it's the hazard that happens. The disaster is a result of the hazard. And if risk reduction has not happened, the disaster effects and impacts will be more. And if risk reduction has been done, the disaster effects and impacts will be less. So if you can reduce the disaster effects and impacts by investing in risk reduction, then the funding that would be needed for the humanitarian efforts, early recovery, and the medium to long-term recovery and reconstruction would be that much less. So this is an equation that has to be taken into consideration when this kind of a strategy is being developed, the one that Bilal was referring to. And for Pakistan, it's extremely important because Pakistan has not caught up. It's still very much, and I'm sure Mubashir Saab over here will be adding to it, Pakistan is still very much in the phase where it's very reactive to disasters. And the risk reduction side is not given that much importance. So with that, let me just quickly also touch upon the point that Bilal was referring to. Investing in disaster risk reduction should happen in all development investments, but not only development investment, but also non-development investments. And this, I'm referring to the routine and periodic operation and maintenance. If assets are not being maintained properly, the risk of those investments opening up the way for disasters to be that much more is greater. So one needs to invest in asset management as well. Then the development budget can include the funding for the development side. Once this has been done, then there is a need to start preparing for what happens if a hazard does play out and there is a certain level of disaster effect and impact, physical infrastructure is destroyed or damaged, people are displaced. Then the funding is needed immediately. Instead of a PDNA, a post-disaster needs assessment happening, or a recovery framework being developed, or the UN launching a flash appeal, immediately funding should be made available, should be available with the government so that they can respond to the needs of the people. That is where this mix of investing in disaster risk reduction and having funds for the post-disaster should be kept in mind.
Thank you very much, Raisa. So, Moshe sir, just to carry on the several points which Raisa raised. So yes,
DRF has actually a lot more kind of a goal and objective built into it just to kind of made our funding available. I personally see that, and not exactly personally, but being my role as the head of DRMF, we actually see an element of social protection into it, very tightly built into it, and that's one of the reasons we are very much focused and we are eager to take it forward. So, Bashir Sahab, there are some prerequisites that I have mentioned. So, you being the person who's actually managing the work in the DRMF, can you tell us that how close we are in terms of the development of strategy to the prerequisites what are required?
Sir, thank you. Once again, I'm very glad to be here. Sir, Rajan Hansa, he has rightly pointed out there are some prerequisites like we need databases, we need probabilistic modeling and risk modeling, because without having those information, data about hazards, about exposure, vulnerabilities of the areas, we cannot move forward. This database is not only required for any disaster risk specific initiative, but overall risk management in the country. For example, our development regime that has to be well informed based on the risk assessments. And we were having this mainstream disaster risk reduction in development planning since many years. But again, there are so many issues that it could not get its roots. Issues that you can understand. Disaster risk financing. Every third year, we are facing major disaster, mostly in flooding, and we are just diverting all funding towards handling those disasters. So risk management includes that we need to be prepared before something happens. It includes this modeling. We have been, in that sense, in Pakistan, first time, we are doing risk modeling, and Pakistan National Space Agency has been engaged by NDRMF, and we are doing all major perils, and we are very near to completion. Early next year, we are launching that database, and it has several components. The basic component would be available through web application to all the users. Then we have specified users. Like one of the specified users in insurance industry itself. And the first time in Pakistan, we are having the loss estimation module, so that someone can judge if something happens, what will be the cost we are going to face. So that is something new in Pakistan, and in South Asian region. Pakistan would be first country having this database at national level. So this is just first step. After completing this database, we are going towards the detailed analytics. And for that, we are having our plan and we are putting our team in place. So the spatial analysis, the data modeling, and as per need modeling would be done by that team. And that is the prerequisite for disaster risk financing and for risk reduction initiatives.
Thank you. Raisa, this seems like a very big ask, kind of a graduating or transitioning from a reactive approach and be kind of a more anticipatory forecast-based financing readily available, which can be kickstarted at any point in time. Yes, the strategy is going to providing the kind of key controls of it and provide some set of recommendations. But you made some very interesting points, and which we have tried to build into our work as well. And the one is how to reduce the risk, because otherwise, no magnitude of the funding is going to be sufficient. So I think the DRR component, disaster risk reduction component, climate action, climate adaptation, I think these are critically important. And would you just tell us from your experience in other countries how they have approached this?
Thank you, Bilal. Reducing risk, and please let me just be a little more holistic over here, because generally when we talk about reducing risk, we are talking about reducing risks against natural hazards and of course risk against climate change. But these two risks, and when we talk about resilient Pakistan, we cannot just focus on these two risks. And this is where I would like to come back to what Mubashir Saab was talking about data. But before that, if we have to reduce risks, we then would need to look at and make Pakistan resilient. We would then have to look at all aspects of resilience. We have to cover the full spectrum. And this is where NDRMF is very well situated to bring all the different elements of resilience together. I'll just name a few, because those are then essential, and I'll also tell you about some international experiences. First and foremost is risk governance. Unless we start reducing risks in our governance frameworks, we will not be able to do justice to reducing risks against natural hazards and reducing risks against climate change. The second is institutional risks. They are playing out almost on a minute by minute or second by second basis. There is no clarity of roles and responsibilities. Institutional clarity of institutional frameworks as part of the legal frameworks, and then how the institutions are going to be implementing their mandates and just focusing on their mandates. That is something which is also a prerequisite for the kind of program that Mubashir was talking about. So that's a very important risk. Countries which have managed to bring some method to the madness in this institutional labyrinth, they have done extremely well when it comes to reducing risks against natural hazards and climate change. Now, let me give you some examples. We have seen examples in some developing countries. I'll talk about Bangladesh. Bangladesh was always hit by flooding every year, and that flooding used to cause major loss to human lives and used to completely erode the physical infrastructure. Now we don't hear about that kind of flooding in Bangladesh. The flooding is still happening. So that's a hazard playing out, but we don't hear about the loss in human lives, and we don't hear about the damage or destruction to the physical infrastructure. And it's very simple. They have adapted to what climate change is bringing about. But not just climate change. There's so many other risks also which are playing out. So they have taken risk reduction in a holistic manner. Just to give you an example, let me talk about their houses used to get destroyed in every flooding. The same happens over here also in 2010, in 2014, in 2022. We've seen how we've lost almost close to 2 million houses or upwards as a result of flooding. In Bangladesh, this used to happen on an annual basis, but what they started doing was they started constructing their homes at a higher altitude, and the lower part used to be just empty. So the water used to flow from the lower part, and the house was not destroyed. Of course, it was it was resilient construction, frame construction, and the water used to just flow from the lower part of the. So that's how they adapted to this kind of risk that used to play out every year. The second is, and I've given this example in so many places, I really like to give this example. Bangladesh used to, the people over there, they used to farm hens, because hens used to give meat as well as eggs. But hens can't swim, and they used to die when the flooding used to happen. So they then graduated or adapted, and then they started farming ducks. So ducks give the same thing. They give eggs as well as meat, but they can swim, so they survive. That is how you start reducing risk right from the people level or the community level. But the enabling environment has to be brought about. That's what the state is responsible for, and the other actors also.
No, thank you very much. Thank you. That's a wonderful example. Sometimes things look very simplistic, like from Bangladesh, just raising the altitude of the houses a little bit. I think that's how the problem. And hens versus ducks is also a wonderful, actually, example. That's a classical case of adaptation, actually. And roasted ducks actually taste much better than hens anyway, and that's based on personal experience. Which is we're talking about data, we're talking about risk reduction and risk management, and it's a moving target. So this is not something which, if we have developed some kind of database and we come to a modeling structure and we develop the expertise and we say that, okay, we actually sit on a comfortable space and we can actually model out, or we can assess and evaluate all the risks. The database which NDLMS is developing, what is the scope of it? What kind of different hazards and perils we cover under it?
Yes, sir. Thank you. You are right, this is not one-time cut-off activity. It is just ongoing process. And this database is particularly focusing on long-term planning and risk management in that perspective. But it will be coupled with available other data sets like MHVRA at district level, then local level data, and then we have so many other sources of data like this page having largest social memory registry in Pakistan. So when we layered and link those databases, we get refined information for our risk management and for our preparedness. At the same time, when for the residual risk, what happens on the ground. So currently we started with 4 parents: flood, drought, cyclone, and earthquake. Then we started that only these are major perils, but we need to include all those. So in we expanded scope, we included heat waves, we included landslide management, then we included hill torrents and urban flooding, which is coming out a big phenomenon as we see in 2022 floods. So we are going to have modeling for 5 major cities in Pakistan, what will happen in certain range and parameters, and what will be the damages and losses and building. And there is a lot of research needed. Out of these databases, in future, we can get so many projects. Like the most prominent project we can have, and definitely we are going towards that, that risk sensitive land use plan at national level and provincial level. That will tell us that which are the area which are safe from all type of hazard, and which are the areas which are no-go area. So that plan must be available on the table who are playing main role in development, so that we should not place our future investment in those areas which are already at risk. And similarly, you see, when we talk about the community preparedness, the community data, the local information that can be also linked with this database. So we are doing a CBDRM projects with particularly with the INB and NGOs, and we are focusing now that these data set village level plans, they should be part of at somewhere at the national level. At the same time, we are going to prepare them for disaster risk initiative, like they should have some common funding at village level, at union council level, so that small risks they can manage, and they can face the future disaster if it happens. And once we invest sufficient or sensibly in risk reduction, this the burden, the premium, the overloading, already it will go down, and the institution and organization, they will not be overburdened. All the time we have to call army, the civilian institutions, they are not grown up to that level that they can handle situation alone. So we need to be very careful that we should have multi-pronged strategy to prepare at all tiers to have a set of instruments and a combination and risk-bearing approach. And I guess this DRF initiative will pave a way for better future.
Thank you very much, Raisa. We hear a lot about risk layering and risk transfer. Our assessments, our observations, our studies are basically showing that the bulk of the risks for a very long period of time in Pakistan might have to be carried by the government institutions and the government funding. Our desire is that the transfer happens at some point in time, and how do you see it? What kind of instruments can be more appropriate or feasible in the specific context of Pakistan?
If we really want to look at the classic definition of risk layering that Mubashir Saab was referring to, then we also need to understand what kind of disasters are happening. Well, let me put it this way: what kind of hazards are happening? The disaster is a consequence. If we are looking at low frequency and mild intensity or severity hazards, then of course this is where the state has to play a role. The state can always do budgetary reallocation, but even in that budgetary reallocation, the point that Mubashir Saab made, the state has to avoid cannibalization of funding. What has been allocated for development should not be cannibalized for using it for maintaining response and for recovery. again, this brings out the point that there should be sufficient financing, or the financial resilience should be there so that cannibalization doesn't happen. That's one side. But if the frequency starts becoming less, the return period is less of certain hazards, but the severity starts increasing, then you have to start the state has to start looking at other avenues of financing. And this is the layering that has been referred to over here. So one side is one phase is you have the retention phase, where the state and the national level actors, be it the public sector or the state or the non-state actors, they are keeping the risk and how they're going to finance it to themselves. The other is passing it on to other kinds of availability of funding, like you have contingent financing. Contingent financing is where you can rely on the MDBs or other sources of financing, and the multi-development banks, they have various instruments, like the World Bank has a CAT-DDO, which is the catastrophe deferred drawdown option. So if funding is available, not physically, but it's been committed, and as soon as a disaster happens of a high severity, which is return period is very low, in that case, you immediately trigger a certain this CAT-DDO, and the funds are available. You also have other forms of financing available also, like sovereign debt. Again, the state can take whether hard loans or soft loans from multi-development banks, and that's the sovereign debt part of it. But this is the retention part again. As you start moving ahead, and the severity and the frequency of the hazards gets even less, the return period is like 1 in 50 or even 1 in 100, but the severity is very high, which is usually the case. There you have to start looking at the transfer phase of this layered approach. And the transfer phase, during the initial phase of the response, you look at parametric risk transfer. And during the medium to long term, you look at the indemnity risk transfer mechanism. And within the parametric, we've heard about parametric insurance. So one can look at the parametric insurance. And I would like to come back to something that Mubashir said. And then when you look at medium to long term recovery and reconstruction, you can look at indemnity insurance as well. But especially for parametric insurance, the data availability and the comprehensiveness of the data is extremely important. I'll give you an example. In Turkey, after the Marmara earthquake, I think it was in 1993, the World Bank helped set up the Turkey Recovery Insurance Pool. And initially, it was very difficult to get the insurance market, which was fairly buoyant in Turkey, to start investing in housing insurance, because the worst affected sector was housing in the Marmara earthquake. And Turkey knew very well that being in a highly active seismic region, and especially Istanbul, they're expecting a major earthquake any day, and that's why the preparation and proactiveness is extremely high. They then realized that in order to attract the insurance market and lower the premiums, because that's the only way the homeowners would buy insurance, they would have to invest in data. And that's where the World Bank helped Turkey to do multi-hazard risk vulnerability assessments, but do it for all types of hazards, not just looking at hydrometeorological, but all kinds. And I think that kind of data comprehensiveness, and then updating the data on a regular basis, the need to curate the data, not just do it once and then forget about it. That's where the institutional role comes in. That is extremely important.
Just as mentioned that insurance sector, we are already very much engaged with the insurance sector, and you see in Pakistan, the insurance penetration is less than 1%. And during my last visit in Australia, I was just asking people and the organization, they have no DRF strategies there, but the people, they are aware about their future risks, and about 80% people, they have their insurance for their own multiple insurance products. Similarly, in Turkey, now they are at that stage that they have made compulsory this insurance for high-rise building or community buildings. So we need to target those that government should have less and less burden, and people should share this thing. So
yeah, that's an important point. insurance can play a pivotal role, but we're talking about a lot of prerequisites, which are unfortunately missing in Pakistan. Data being one, insurance is, either is parametric or any other kind of specialized insurance product. I think these are the kind of challenges which we are facing in terms of finalizing and coming up with a kind of actionable strategy as well. In Pakistan, most of the public infrastructure is not insured for any kind of perils, any kind of hazards actually, or disasters. So this is something actually NDRMF is about to start this, that any piece of the work, any infrastructure interventions or investment we do, we actually get it insured and just to develop the market. So there are some fundamental kind of structural or prerequisites which are missing. Data being one, institutional kind of frameworks are also missing, and then kind of a general level of understanding as well. And the capital markets are not really ripe, and they're not really ready. So how to move it forward? I mean, it might be an easier part for us to kind of have a very good strategy, but we feel extremely obliged to implement it as well. So I think, but these prerequisites need to be somehow addressed, no matter how gradually.
Gia, thank you so much, Bilal. And I just, before giving my views on what you were just saying, I just want to come back to a question that you asked earlier. Right now, the general situation is that the responsibility for response is on the state. This is not viable. It's not sustainable. I'll give you a very good example. After the 2005 earthquake, the state subsidized the reconstruction of core units of housing. Now we are in 2022, 17 years down the road, but 23, but 22 floods happened. The state is still subsidizing core units of housing for those who lost their homes. That is not what the state should be doing. This is where the different layers of risk transfer need to kick in. And as happened in Turkey, the insurance market was literally wooed. They were attracted to come and be part of this whole equation by the state. The state created the enabling environment, took the necessary steps at the policy level, at the legal framework level, and then made sure that all the data on hazard risk and vulnerability was available to the insurance industry. That is what the role of the state needs to be. Unless that will happen in Pakistan, the state will continue to bear the brunt of financing recovery and reconstruction. And this becomes even many times more or exponentially more because not enough money has been spent on disaster risk reduction. So it's a great step. The strategy is being developed. That's the first step in the right direction. But a strategy on paper is not going to cut it. Strategy would have to be owned by, in this case, Ministry of Finance. That's what globally is the norm. And then the Ministry of Finance would have to loop in, or let me be bold enough to say, would have to rope in all the other key stakeholders and shareholders. Shareholders are the people. The stakeholders are, one of them is the insurance market, the capital markets. Now, this strategy should really, in my view, should lay out an action plan for the immediate steps that need to be taken to create the enabling environment, the short term, the medium term, and long term. And these steps should be divided into 4 or 5 headings. One is institutional setup, the clarity of institutional roles and responsibilities. And for me, the legal framework is also dovetailed with this. The second is the policy environment. Unless the policy environment is one, uniform, consistently applied, this is not going to work. And there can be no exceptions. Third is financing. And we talked enough about financing, but the intention is to take the burden away from the state, because the state relies on the people. So indirectly, the burden comes on the people. And finally, the implementation or the enforcement. And this is where the state's role should really be that of a regulator and enforcer. It should not be an implementer. That's where the stakeholders come in, the partners come in, the private sector, the capital markets, the insurance industry, even civil society, NGOs, they are so active over here, but they're all splintered. That is what the state needs to do to bring them under one umbrella.
Thank you very much. We have to wrap it up. Just one question maybe from the audience. Yes, madam.
This is an area task from Radio Pakistan and also I'm associate of Ministry of Climate Change. Assalamualaikum. This is an task. I'm a broadcast journalist and also I work as an associate with Ministry. First of all, I would like to thank for such a comprehensive and brief talk. It is very informative. I feel very privileged to be here. I did not have an idea, like a lot of work is going on. The whole thing that keeps going on in my mind is sir discuss and talk about the risk reduction, but how about the risk assessment? I mean, the masses, they're not well aware, and I'm so sorry to say the whole talk is in English. Majority of the population cannot even understand. So there should be an app, there should be a portal that the whole data, everything should be in Urdu. Because if the people are very well aware, the locals who are very prone, who are very vulnerable to that hazard, that particular hazard, I believe those people in the north, in Fata, like if we talk about the landsliding on the Murray Expressway, they're very tough people. And they are the people of belief. And they are those who will volunteer. They won't wait for the military or the civilians to come. So how we can aware them? So they as a team, how we can do the capacity building.
No, thank you very much. Thank you. I'll ask Raisa to respond to just a very quick one. Thank you very much for your question. Wonderful question. I must say that. I think we have the parallel kind of streams and the programs which are going on. So we have one going on awareness raising, advocacy, and a number of other initiatives where we are actually engaging with the public, with the different stakeholders, especially through our partners. The purpose of this talk is actually kind of bring the level of understanding and the awareness to the audience who are practitioners, and especially to bring some of the international stakeholders into the discussion as well. But we're not really forgetting, or we're not bypassing them, and that is absolutely necessary. And Raisa, you want to respond?
Gee, first of all, an excellent question, Ji. We are talking about a lot of things at the strategic level, technical level. Let me give you my response based on my experience. I've worked with the communities at the community level for decades as part of my job. One thing I realized was that they are more aware of their own environment than any one of us, because we go there, we talk about things. They are much better at understanding their environment. But it's the as you very rightly put it, it's the lack of awareness of these kind of macro level phenomenons or things which they don't understand. My experience, and I'll refer to the 2005 earthquake, because I want to focus on an example where we did have a disaster. People lost their homes, and when the state went through different avenues to help them reconstruct, they brought in prefab material and construction which could be done overnight, and everyone rejected those homes. They said, we don't like them because they don't come to our culture tradition. That's where their own knowledge of their environment comes in. So I'll give you an example. In AJK, they use Dhaji construction. And so we then learned the hard way, and the state then, when I say we, I'm referring to the state, ERA then designed seismically resistant Dhaji construction, which was adopted in AJK, and they loved it. In NWFP, it was Bhattar construction. So they reinforced the Bhattar construction, and they liked that construction. Now, one of the key ways how they can understand this is, first of all, this can be translated into Urdu and other vernacular languages very easily while this is being put up on YouTube or wherever. The second is, this is where the role of partners come in, the extension of the state through partners. There are numerous NGOs, both the Gongos, if we call them the government-owned NGOs or supported NGOs like the RSPs. And we have other NGOs also. We have civil society organizations. This is the kind of role they excel at. Now, if this kind of a session can be used to jumpstart how they can then go and raise the awareness, then the people will understand very quickly. So I think this is not just a one-off communication, it's a start of a communication, and it needs to be carried through down to the level of to the people.
Just to add, for the purpose of clarification, just to add for the purpose of clarification, when we talk about the natural trust of the data and DRMF has made Sparko for that to NetGet, it has specific purposes, probabilistic model. This is mostly not for the general public. This is for those who are the decision maker at national level. But one part, definitely it will go to the general public and will ensure better understanding और उसमें translation वाला भी element आए. तो दूसरा एक different databases. We have different databases at PDMA level, at DDMA district level. Those data sets has to be more community oriented with even local languages. Your point is well.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's the end of it. Thank you very much, Raisa. Thank you, Mubashir sir. I enjoyed the discussion, and I learned a few more things. So thank you very much, and thank you to everyone. Keep watching us. We are on YouTube and DRMF official YouTube channel. I'm becoming like a salesman, but I think that's fine. I'm enjoying it. Thank you very much.